It's 5:05 and welcome into a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Well, President Donald Trump is set to appear in Davos, Switzerland later today as part of the very elite World Economic Forum. The event takes place in Davos every year. A little bit of a delayed start on that. The president left from Washington, D.C., Joint Base Andrews last night aboard Air Force One, as you would imagine, traveling about 7 or 8 hours overseas. However, about 45 minutes into the flight, there were some apparently electrical issues with the aircraft that forced the craft back to Washington, D.C. The president boarded another aircraft and left for Switzerland shortly after midnight Eastern time and as he continued his trek overseas. So we'll see whether that will delay the president's comments at the World Economic Forum coming up later on today. There are more than 3,000 high-level participants from more than 130 countries that have been speaking and will continue to speak in Davos, Switzerland over the coming days. And as you can imagine, many of the presidents ratchet up commentary on tariffs. Greenland and many of these other conversations are forcing all eyes on what his commentary is going to look like as it takes place later today in Switzerland. Most recently here, North Carolina's economy would be negatively impacted by an estimated $108 billion in retaliatory tariffs threatened by the European Union. This is in direct response to President Trump's threatened tariff pressures for the sale of Greenland to the United States. Trump made the announcement back on January the 17th in a post on Truth Social, and one day later, January 18th, the European Union threatened retaliatory tariffs to pressure Denmark against selling Greenland to the United States. Donald Bryson, the CEO and president of the John Locke Foundation, told the Carolina Journal, the European Union's response confirms that tariff threats are no longer abstract. They are beginning to shape real economic behavior. Last week's John Locke Foundation study examined how retaliation by major trade partners can affect North Carolina, particularly because so much of our agriculture depends on the export market. When retaliation is signaled, it doesn't matter which country buys which crops. Reduced global demand leads to lower prices across the board and nationwide. The mechanism places export-dependent sectors like cotton, tobacco, pork, and sweet potatoes at particular risk here across the Tar Heel state. According to the Truth Social post from the president, started on February the 1st, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland will all be charged a 10% tariff on all goods shipped into the United States. That tariff will increase to a whopping 25% on June the 1st, according to the Post, and it will remain in effect until an agreement is reached on the purchase of Greenland. Joseph Harris, who is a fiscal policy analyst for the John Locke Foundation, told the Carolina Journal, the Trump administration has argued that acquiring Greenland is a national security necessity to counter both China and Russia, a view that many European governments have rejected. In response, the administration has threatened a 10% tariff on imports from several European countries beginning in February, with rates rising to 25% this summer if no agreement is reached. European officials have said that they are prepared to respond with substantial counter tariffs, potentially targeting more than $100 billion worth of U.S. exports. An intensified tariff escalation of this nature would risk turning a political dispute into broader economic shock. Trump has stated that the U.S. taking control of Greenland again is necessary to counter some of those Russia and Chinese threats. That's according to reporting most recently from the Wall Street Journal. It remains unclear whether these February 1 tariffs announced by President Trump would be stacked on top of existing tariffs, which also, by the way, currently sit at about 15% for most of the goods coming out of the European Union and 10% for goods coming out of the UK. Joseph Harris said, while the tariff threats are not new for Trump, viewed alongside recent U.S. action in Venezuela, this episode suggests a willingness to use trade and economic pressures alongside other tools to pursue strategic objectives across the Western Hemisphere. These tariff discussions are nothing new here across the United States, and nothing new in North Carolina. We have over the last year now have covered a litany of stories and a litany of impacts as it relates to the president's continued escalation on tariff threats to trade nations, some friendly, some not, across the globe. This most recent announcement from the president late last week and over the weekend is another one that we are going to continue to track and see what those impacts are very well could be on many of the industries here in North Carolina. We focus so much on agriculture because it is the state's largest business. Yes, still, even in 2026, agriculture is the largest economic driver in terms of an industry in North Carolina. So any hits to that industry for small to medium-sized farms across the United States could be very detrimental to North Carolina's overall economy. We'll continue to watch as those tariff talks continue and likely continue to be a major topic of discussion. Trump's third visit as president to the Davos World Economic Forum comes as U.S. allies worry about his ambition to take over Greenland, while others across portions of Latin America grapple with the ongoing escalation in Venezuela. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Tuesday called Trump's plans for new tariffs on 8 of its countries over Greenland a, quote, mistake, and questioned Trump's trustworthiness, as well as French President Emmanuel Macron said that the EU could retaliate by deploying one of its most powerful economic tools, colloquially adding it and calling it a bazooka as it relates to trade. So again, we'll hear from the president later on today in Davos, Switzerland. We'll track his commentary. You'll hear it throughout the day right here on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. And of course, as we continue to track the North Carolina connection, the North Carolina impact, we'll bring you the latest details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:12 on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. We will head on over to the traffic center on your early Wednesday morning commute, get an update with the great, the legendary, Boomer Von Cannon.
I still can't live up to it, man.
Yes, you can, Boomer. You just got to believe. That's how this works.
That's right. Hey, I'm with you. Okay. I love that. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Sorry, that took a second. Hot.
It's 5:18. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. We're tracking an interesting story this morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com. Our friend Teresa Opeka has the details. The headline is this: new law lets North Carolina police take down dangerous drones. Interesting story. Growing concerns over malicious drone activity across the nation, including here in North Carolina, has prompted a new federal law that grants both state and local law enforcement officials the ability to take down those aircraft. This is part of the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, that's the NDAA, which was signed into law on December the 18th. The Safer Skies Act grants state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement and correctional agencies the authority to detect, track, and mitigate drones that could be posing credible threats to public safety, things like critical infrastructure and large events, once they complete federally mandated training and certification using technology that is federally authorized. This is not going to be a situation in which you will have a local or state police pulling out a 9mm and shooting at drones in the sky. This is going to be and is currently a system that the federal government is rolling out. Agencies have up to 48 hours to report actions to the Department of Justice as well as the Department of Homeland Security, with Governor Josh Stein saying at a recent press conference that it quickly became apparent last year to the bipartisan Council of Governors, those are governors all across the U.S., that the malicious use of drones has become a real problem across the country. He and former Republican Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin were the co-chairs of the council at the time and obviously engaged in some pretty serious dialogue about it. In his role as co-chair, Stein, a Democrat, recommended establishing a national CUAS, which is a counter-unmanned aircraft system coordination office, allocating $500 million in federal funding and support for counter-UAS technology, training, and personnel, as well as leveraging the experience and resources of public-private partnerships to develop CUAS strategies. CUAS, or Counter-Unmanned Aircraft Systems, refers to emerging federal efforts, notably led by the Department of Homeland Security and involving the Department of Justice, the Department of War, and Department of Transportation, to unify national strategies for detecting and defeating rogue drone technology. In September of last year, Stein and Republican Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry led a bipartisan group of governors in sending a letter to Congress urging them to enact legislation to enhance state capacity to detect and mitigate drone threats. More than 30 governors of both parties signed on to the letter. So obviously, some very strong bipartisan support, and as well as a growing concern by many of these governors, as you would imagine and expect, with the governor saying most recently, "We all know that drones can be incredibly useful. In the aftermath of Hurricane Helene in western North Carolina, we used drones to survey damage, to search for survivors, to direct resource teams. But the risks are just as real as the rewards. We've seen drones used to deliver contraband to prison, making the already difficult job of correctional officers even harder." He added that there is a potential for bad actors to use weaponized drones at critical infrastructure sites or large public gatherings, such as the upcoming World Cup soccer tournament that's going to be taking place in June in Charlotte, as well as many planned America 250th anniversary celebrations, as well as other outdoor sporting events and concerts. The state of North Carolina, especially as we get into the spring and summer months, will be littered with large outdoor events, whether they're festivals, concerts, sporting events, the like. And this is again, continues to be a growing concern for those in the public sphere. Stein said securing American airspace is urgent, and federal, state, and local officials each have a role to play in protecting the public. He agreed that while everybody is safer under the Safer Skies Act, again, that was part of the 2026 Defense Authorization Act, the Council of Governors is advocating that state and local law enforcement be included in the rulemaking process, with the governor saying for the Safer Skies initiative to be successful and effective, the rules must reflect the day-to-day work conditions of both state and local law enforcement. He said that this past fall, former Public Safety Secretary Eddie Buffalo led a law enforcement group comprising of local, state, and federal agencies to identify ways in which the state of North Carolina can mitigate the risk posed by these unmanned aerial systems. The group identified the need for more proactive authority as well as for additional state laws to protect critical infrastructure. The governor noted they came to a consensus on a common sense draft piece of legislation addressing those issues, and noted that we started to have conversations with members of the General Assembly, with the governor saying he does plan to work with the GA again on a bipartisan basis to see some of this enacted into law potentially as early as this summer, as the General Assembly short session will kick off here not before long. North Carolina Secretary of Public Safety Jeff Smythe agreed with the governor that drones are an important tool when it comes to their use in search and rescue operations, things like wildfire monitoring and hurricane recovery. But as the technology continues to evolve, it becomes more autonomous, sophisticated, and accessible to bad actors who can misuse them. He said that they are taking a deliberate and balanced approach as a state, with a focus on first protecting critical infrastructure, things like power generation facilities, water system, ports, transportation hubs, communication networks, and correctional institutions. After that, they want to ensure that law enforcement and correctional officers have clear rules of engagement from the federal government and do not have to guess whether they have the authority when a drone is hovering near a correctional facility, as an example. The final part of this is they are committed to following the federal law, preventing harm, and keeping pace with modern risks, seeing that it is not about expanding surveillance. Jeff Smythe said the takeaway is simple. You don't have to think about drones to benefit from this work. You'll benefit when your power stays on. You'll benefit when your water system is secure. When law enforcement and correctional officers do their job safely, you benefit when public safety agencies are prepared for the threats of tomorrow, not just yesterday. Governor Stein underscored that federal law already allows states to prohibit the malicious use of drones, such as, for example, the delivery of contraband into prison, but certain critical infrastructures like electricity, water, and telecommunications is not currently covered by North Carolina law, which is why he is now calling on the North Carolina General Assembly to strengthen some of our statewide regulations, saying in a statement, "What federal law has said until today is that state and local governments were prohibited from mitigating drones, meaning shooting them down if they are malicious. Now, under the Safer Skies Act, if a state or local government goes through a federal training program, they have the authority, when it is appropriate, when there is a risk, to actually take action against a specific drone, because the current law only holds accountable the person who is directing the drone. But the person may be miles away, and you have no idea who they are, but the drone is right there and currently creates a present, real, and clear danger." And so that's the change in federal law that we have been seeking. Again, all of that is now in effect here across not only North Carolina, but the rest of the nation as part of the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. Part of that act included the Authorization Act included the Safer Skies Act, which again grants those state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement and correctional agencies to detect, track, and mitigate drones that they deem could be posing credible threats to public safety. This is not the first time that we have seen regulation as it relates to drones. There are new FAA regulations that have been put in place to try and clean up the airspace as well, and try and put some level, some bar, some barrier to entry in place for individuals that can go on Amazon or other online shopping platforms, spend a couple of $100 and be flying around one of these unmanned drones. You can read additional coverage of this over over on our website this morning, carolinajournal.com. Teresa Opeka has the story with the headline, New Law Lets NC Police Take Down Dangerous Drones. It's now 5:28 on the Carolina Journal News Hour, Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. We'll head back to the traffic center, get another look at the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. And then
It's 5:35. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Wednesday morning to you. During the General Assembly's long session in 2025, a couple of congressional districts, 1 and 3, were redrawn by the North Carolina legislature. As you can imagine, that prompted some legal challenges here across the state of North Carolina, which has become a trend in recent years. Anytime maps are either drawn or redrawn across the state of North Carolina. Some pretty significant updates this morning as a couple of those suits seem to now be over. To walk us through some of those details, Mitch Kokai with the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Mitch, everybody's favorite topic, redistricting. We seem to talk about it almost all the time, even though maps, get new maps every 10 years. Yes, there's been some ongoing legal challenges over the last 20 or so years in North Carolina. What's the latest you're tracking with these primary maps and general election maps that are taking place this year in 2026?
Well, the short answer is that a couple of the lawsuits challenging North Carolina maps are now over. Just to give you a little bit of background, when the General Assembly redrew legislative and congressional election maps for the 2024 election cycle, that produced 4 different lawsuits, 3 in federal court, 1 in state court. One of those suits, which had to do with 2 state Senate districts in northeastern North Carolina, that case is at the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. There's another case that was filed by former state Supreme Court Justice Bob Orr asking for a state constitutional right for fair elections and then using that right to fair elections to throw out some of the election districts. That case, Orr lost at the trial court level, but has appealed to the State Court of Appeals. That case is there. And then there are the other 2 suits which had been consolidated for trial. Initially, those suits challenged both districts in the congressional map and districts in the state House and state Senate map. A 3-judge federal panel held a trial on that issue in the summer of 2025. And then before a ruling came out, the General Assembly went back, as you suggested, and redrew the congressional map to change districts 1 and 3. So after that happened, the plaintiffs who had already had a trial dealing with their earlier challenges said to the court, hey, allow us to come back and supplement our complaint to challenge this new congressional map. The court said, yes, you can do that. And then before issuing a ruling about the new congressional map, the panel came out and threw out all of the challenges that the plaintiffs had to any of the other maps. So they said, okay, we're not going to rule in your favor on anything else, but we are going to leave open this issue of the congressional map. About a week after that, the same panel came back and said, we're not going to issue an injunction. This new congressional map can stand for the 2026 election. So basically, the only thing left in that suit was to have a discovery and trial or some sort of motion for summary judgment on the congressional map. But now that prospect is gone because the plaintiffs in the case, 2 different sets of plaintiffs, one led by the NAACP and Common Cause, the other one led by plaintiffs working with Democratic operative Mark Elias. They have now dropped their cases. They've said, suit's over. We're not going to continue to press this. And so that means that we do not have to have the prospect of having any sort of trial that might put this congressional map in jeopardy beyond 2026. As things stand, the congressional map that we have in place now is going to remain in place throughout this election cycle, and barring any future lawsuit that we don't know about, would be the map that would be in place at least through the end of this decade, or the next time the General Assembly decides it wants to redraw the map, which might not be until after the 2030 census.
And Mitch, I want to hone in on the kind of some of what we've seen in the more recent months with this. You mentioned, and obviously at this point, candidate filing is already wrapped up. That happened in December of last year. Mail ballots have already been sent out to some people. Overseas votes actually have already been tallied here across the state of North Carolina. Primary day is March 3rd, so the maps are pretty much, for all intents and purposes, were already going to be set in stone for 2026. But we have seen in the past where an election happens one year while a legal challenge continues to play out. Candidates get elected, Mitch. The decision is made by a court later on, and those maps are thrown out. Then they have to be redrawn again. That has been something that we've seen not too long ago here in North Carolina.
We have seen that happen, and often the reason for that is that when a lawsuit is filed challenging one of these maps, the plaintiffs will seek an injunction. And sometimes the courts will say, well, no, because of the timing or because it's not clear, we're not going to issue an injunction. So the maps can be used. But then later on, once there's a trial or there's additional evidence put forward, the court might say, well, the plaintiffs, you actually do win this case. And so the maps get thrown out and have to be redrawn. In this case, we're not going to have that prospect. Basically, the plaintiffs wanted to block the map for 2026. That was their primary goal. That didn't happen. The court just around Thanksgiving time came out with an order saying, no, we're not going to issue an injunction. These maps will stay in place for 2026. The plaintiffs in this case didn't go to the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to try to get the injunction that way. They basically just allowed that decision to stand. And then now, almost 2 months later, have decided that they're not going to try to wage any more legal war against this map. They have decided to throw out the rest of their complaint. Interestingly enough, as part of the stipulation of dismissal of this case, all parties are going to pay their own court costs for the part of this suit that dealt with the latest congressional map. But the plaintiffs in this case have agreed to pay for the legislative defendants' court costs for all of the rest of the suit, which means that they seem to realize they were not going to win. They're not going to try to appeal it to the Fourth Circuit. And the legislative defendants have said, you should have to pay the taxpayers for having to defend these maps. And the plaintiffs have apparently, according to the court filing, agreed to go along with that.
Obviously, Mitch, our focus here is North Carolina. That's what we focus on day in and day out on the Carolina Journal News Hour. And every state's legislature is different. The rules and regulations on can they do a mid-decade redistricting with their legislative maps or congressional maps, all that stuff is a little bit different. This does, however, Mitch, seem to be kind of a growing cottage industry. We see it in states. There's been a lot of discussion about redistricting and redistricting lawsuits across the entire United States this year. It would not appear to me that the temperature is ratcheting down on this in any way, and it's probably going to become seeming to me, more of the norm going forward.
Yes, and this has actually been something that's been true for a number of years, and you see a lot of the same lawyers who are experts on this issue litigating redistricting in multiple states. I mentioned earlier that one of the sets of plaintiffs in this case that's now been dismissed worked with Democratic operative Mark Elias, and Mark Elias tends to be involved in a lot of election-related suits, including redistricting suits, either attacking maps drawn by Republicans and saying that they're unconstitutional, or being involved in helping defend maps that are drawn by Democrats and saying that they got it right. And you see the same thing on the other side, too. There are Republican experts on redistricting and Republican lawyers on redistricting who not only work on the North Carolina cases, but are also involved in cases in other states, either defending the handiwork of Republicans or attacking the work that's been done by Democrats. And this is something that really has grown into, as you suggested, a cottage industry. It became much more popular once more parties became two-party states. For years and years, North Carolina was a Democratic state controlled by Democrats. There wasn't really much of a reason for Republicans to get involved in redistricting. But once North Carolina became really a two-party state, probably from at least the 1990s, maybe even going back to the 1980s and beyond, it became much more likely that year in, year out, whoever was drawing the election maps in North Carolina, the side that was not the one drawing the maps was going to go to court and try to get an election win through the courts. For me, I think the most interesting part of this recent development is that the plaintiffs in this case, who could have gone forward and could have tried to continue to attack this congressional map through a trial, through additional discovery, basically saw the ruling, saw what the court had said on every other part of this case, probably looked at what the Fourth Circuit has been doing on these cases and what the U.S. Supreme Court has been saying on these cases, and decided, no, let's just end it here. We lost. We'll take the loss. We'll go back, bandage up our wounds, and try again the next time that there's a new map that we might want to challenge.
Yes, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what side of this you're on, there will be a next time. The question is, how quickly will that take place here in North Carolina? We've got extensive coverage on this new congressional maps for congressional districts 1 and 3. You can read some of that continuing coverage this morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com. We appreciate the update this morning. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:46 on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. We'll head back to the traffic center, get another look at the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick. Hey, we have water main.
Good morning again. It's 5:52. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. We've got some pretty big business news we're tracking this morning over at carolinajournal.com. Genentech, a member of the Roche Group, announced Tuesday that it plans to more than double its spending on its company's first ever East Coast manufacturing facility that they had announced back, I believe it was early last year, in Holly Springs. This is with the help of, as you would imagine, local and state government incentives. It's a San Francisco-based biotech company which held a groundbreaking for its facility in August of last year. Initial plans were to invest somewhere in the ballpark of $700 million. However, that figure has now increased to a whopping $2 billion. The additional investment is expected to add an additional 100 new jobs, with the project supporting some 1,500 construction jobs and more than 500 manufacturing jobs, with an average annual wage of $120,000 a year. The project will be partially funded through a state government job development investment grant, also known as a JDIG, with the project estimated to grow by more than $3 billion over the 12-year term. Under the JDIG agreement, the company may receive up to $9.8 million in potential reimbursements from the state of North Carolina over that 12-year period of time. However, all of that is contingent upon creating some 420 jobs. These payments are issued after the Department of Commerce and Revenue confirms, in fact, that the company has met its job creation and investment targets. Additional incentives comprise of $756,000 from the North Carolina Community College System, $827,000 from the Department of Commerce's Division of Workforce Solutions, a whopping $19.7 million from Wake County, and another $13.7 million from the town of Holly Springs. This is all according to an August press release from the San Francisco-based company. According to those statements, the company will build out additional production capacity and significantly increase the facility's output through the growth. The 700,000 square foot facility will support the production of metabolic medicines, including next generation treatments for obesity. Governor Josh Stein said in a recent press release, Genentech's increased investment in Holly Springs creates durable jobs and strengthens our life science sector. This expansion reinforces North Carolina's role in supporting innovation, workforce development, and long-term economic opportunity. The expanded facilities are set to be completely open and operational sometime, hopefully by 2029. The CEO of the company has said in a press release, "We are excited to further expand our investment in our state-of-the-art manufacturing facility in Holly Springs, North Carolina." That's again just outside the Raleigh area. This expansion reflects our long-term commitment to the United States and communities like Holly Springs that offer the kind of world-class biotech talent, top research institutions, and strong infrastructure that makes the innovation possible. The CEO also said during the August groundbreaking ceremony that the company, in fact, supports President Donald Trump's goal of bringing more pharmaceutical manufacturing to the United States and appreciated the work of U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, as well as the Department of Commerce's U.S. Investment Accelerator, and what they are doing to remove regulatory barriers that cause long-term delays in establishing manufacturing sites in the United States. North Carolina's biotech and pharmaceutical sectors include already a litany of manufacturing and R&D sites. These companies export products and rely on global supply chains, including equipment and materials from places like Europe, as public discord over the past few weeks as it relates to U.S. and EU, UK tariff policies does remain to create some level of uncertainty. We will likely hear more about that later on today, as President Donald Trump will be in Davos speaking at the World Economic Forum, their 2026 annual meeting, posting on social media in the last couple of days that, in fact, there are going to be some additional retaliatory tariffs on the EU and the UK. We'll follow those details and bring you the latest over on our website, carolinajournal.com. That's going to do it for a Wednesday edition. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back for you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT.